Joining us now is a good friend, Ben Shapiro, author of Lions and Scavengers. Congratulations, Ben, on the new book, The True Story of America. And we will get to that in great detail. I want everyone to check it out. It's Lions and Scavengers. Ben, the previous segment, I was refuting Mr. Van Jones on a variety of different things because he decided to attack me on CNN. But you've done some really important work on George Floyd's cause of death. Can you remind the audience what your study and your research showed about George Floyd overdosing on drugs?
Sure. I mean, it was basically just the autopsy report. I mean, the autopsy report showed that he had a massively enlarged heart, that he had extraordinary quantities of drugs, including fentanyl, in his system, enough fentanyl to kill a normal person multiple times over. The original coroner suggested that if they had found George Floyd dead in his home, they would have assumed that he died of a drug overdose. If you actually watch the tape of the confrontation with the officers, he's saying, "I can't breathe," well before he gets out of the car. In fact, one of the reasons they take him out of the car is he's taken out at his own request. And so, again, the medical evidence does not suggest that there's no damage to his trachea. There's no damage to his neck. The medical evidence does not suggest that he actually died as a result of Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck. It suggests that he died as a result of probably excited delirium, meaning elevated heart rate as a result of both ingesting drugs, enlarged heart, and the excitement of being arrested.
Well, and on top of that, they also say that this was racially motivated. Is there any evidence at all that there was racial animus in this situation? So Van Jones said it was obviously a racial thing. Hold on. If you're actually imparting your own racial stereotypes onto a situation of which even Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, rejected the claim that race was involved in this. Is that correct?
This is exactly right. I mean, there was a federal civil rights charge that was brought against Derek Chauvin, and it did not even allege that there is a violation of civil rights on the basis of race. So literally no one, not the prosecutor's state, not the prosecutor's federal, no one made the actual legal claim that the actions of Derek Chauvin were rooted in racism. The best available criminal case against Derek Chauvin would have been like a low-degree manslaughter case for negligence in his handling of the actual situation. But literally zero evidence was provided to the idea that Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd because George Floyd was black. That just was not in evidence. It wasn't even alleged.
So, and you've done phenomenal work on this. Everyone should check it out. It's really important. Shifting gears here for a second. So we're on Team Civilization here. We want to see the maniacs of Hamas be defeated and the barbarians of Islam not be able to storm the gates of the West. So we've seen news this morning that quite honestly I'm a little confused by, and I was hoping you could navigate it and help us understand, which is that Israel bombed Qatar, which houses a lot of Hamas officials. What happened here? And if I were to introduce just the skeptical question, will this potentially endanger America's own interests in the Middle East? So please, Ben, help me better understand the situation.
Sure. So I think that the lead up to understand here is that Qatar sort of plays both sides when it comes to its negotiating stance between Hamas and Israel and the United States. So it has provided extraordinary material support to Hamas directly, billions of dollars in material support to Hamas. The leadership of Hamas have been living in Qatar for years at five-star hotels. Hamas's priorities have been pressed by Qatar in negotiations multiple times. Qatar has not put significant pressure on Hamas in the past to release the hostages or to end the war. And so basically, as Israel nears the end of the war, which is what this last movement in Gaza City is supposed to be, there's a final offer that was put on the table actually by the Trump administration that essentially said that Hamas should release the remaining 48 hostages, meaning 28 dead bodies and 20 alive hostages, and the United States would then guarantee, through its own honest brokerage, some sort of end to the war that would result in the disarming of Hamas and the movement of the Gaza Strip to presumably some sort of coalitional government supported by regional states and the rebuilding of the area. And Qatar was pushing Hamas, apparently, we heard. And Hamas this morning in Arabic actually rejected it. That's not been widely reported by the media, but it's true. Hamas actually rejected the American offer. The president had put out via Truth Social a statement saying, this is your last chance, and if you don't do that, bad things are going to happen. The idea that Israel would be able to fly 10 F-16s all the way across the Middle East to Qatar to strike a very specific terror target in Doha without American knowledge beggars the imagination. It is extraordinarily unlikely, to say the very least. Honestly, it would not be wildly improbable if Qatar knew that was coming as well. And so Israel struck at the top level of the remaining Hamas in Qatar in an attempt to basically change the negotiating status. So the basic idea here is if you will not negotiate, if you refuse to get to the end of this war, well, then maybe we'll find somebody who can. Or maybe the idea is that you're safe nowhere until this war ends. Additional pressure had to be brought to bear, and that's why Israel did what it did. Obviously, I, as well, am on Team Civilization. I'm very happy to see Hamas's top leaders killed. I hope that as many of them in the leadership, with as little loss of civilian life as possible, I hope that as many of them died in this attack as humanly possible. And again, I'd be very surprised. I mean, we do know actually from contemporaneous reporting that the United States was at least given the heads up on the Israeli operation in the moments before it went.
I just spent time in Japan, and one of the things that kind of looms over Japan is that Japan, they engaged in an unconditional surrender. That they said, we're done. And they laid down their arms, obviously, after the 2 atomic bombs. Very controversial. People have mixed opinions on it. I certainly do. But that it is unconditional surrender. Is that what Israel is aiming for here? I suppose that is a question that I get a lot on campus. What does success look like? Because I think we could all agree a long war is not good for Israel. A long, drawn-out war, and we're coming towards 2 years in about a month, so it's been about 23 months. So what does ultimate success look like in the Gaza Strip?
So my main critique of the Netanyahu administration in Israel, the Netanyahu government, is they didn't move faster. I think this should have been a much more accelerated process. Israel set out at the beginning of this war with 2 goals, as articulated by the Israeli government. Goal number 1 was to get as many hostages out as humanly possible to free the hostages, and second was to win the war. In many ways, those are mutually exclusive goals, because if you actually wish to win the war, then you have to do things militarily that are going to involve actual movement on the ground. And meanwhile, Hamas is attempting to basically use the hostages as its own form of human shields. They use their own civilians as human shields. They're also using the hostages as a form of human shield. And so as you came to the end of the war, this was always going to be the question, is how the war kind of came to its final terminus. The priorities that Netanyahu has laid out publicly include basically it's let the hostages out, and there can't be a future military threat to Israel. Those are, if you had to sum it all up, those are the 2 things. How that materializes, in my opinion, is likely to be an Israeli military occupation of large swaths of the Gaza Strip, the setting up of humanitarian areas, particularly on the coast and in Rafah, in which humanitarian aid is provided, a pathway out for people who actually want to leave. This is the only conflict of which I'm aware on planet Earth in which there are outside countries telling people who would like to leave that they literally cannot. The Trump administration has been trying to facilitate the ability of people who want to leave to do so, and has also been trying to facilitate the entry of not only humanitarian aid, but investment into the areas that have been cleared of terrorists, and then you can see some sort of Hamas-free rebuilding. That would be the goal of the end of the war. Now, my understanding is that the sort of last untouched area of the Gaza Strip, in terms of Israeli serious military operations, is Gaza City. It's why there's been so much focus on Gaza City. Last I heard, Israel already controls something 40 to 50% of the territory in Gaza City. They've been warning people to get out for at least a couple of weeks now. Hamas has been stopping people at checkpoints and turning them back and shooting them if they don't stay in the city to be used as human shields by Hamas. So that's the current situation on the ground.
What other feedback or criticism would you have about this situation? I know that it's impossible for anyone to listen to everything that you ever say, but looking at this from an American perspective, what else would you say things could have been handled differently? Maybe on the PR front, maybe also just on a conduct front. Where would you say, as an outsider, things that could have been handled better, more efficiently, or with more precision?
So number one, there's no such thing as a perfect war. So obviously in any war, there are going to be things that happen that are ugly and that are terrible. And that is why war is a terrible thing. As far as a sort of operational front, again, I've spent an awful lot of time in Israel. I've watched tape of operations happening, drone operations. I've met with an enormous number of Israeli soldiers, young men and women, people who are 18, 19, 20 years old, who have had legitimately their limbs blown off going house to house in an area where they didn't have to. The charge that Israel has been indiscriminate in its use of force in the Gaza Strip is an absurdity on its face. Israel has complete air superiority over the Gaza Strip. If it wanted to level the place and turn it into a parking lot October 8th, it certainly had the military capacity to do so. It has not done that. Instead, it has sacrificed legitimately 1,000 of its own young men, particularly in these areas, and thousands more who are wounded for the rest of their lives, going house to house in an attempt to prevent all that, and is currently shipping in 4,400 calories per day per person into the Gaza Strip, much of which is then stolen by Hamas. So that is not to say that any war is perfect. This war has been conducted in about as meticulous way as any urban war in history. Just because war is ugly doesn't mean that it's being fought wrongly. And I think that the main mistake that Israel has made is misunderstanding how public relations works, in the sense that they couldn't have presented this war in a better, kinder way that people would have loved. What they could have done is move faster. And the reality is that the American way of doing war is to win as fast as possible. And we don't like long, drawn-out occupations. We don't like long, drawn-out military operations. That's true in Iraq. It's true in Afghanistan. It's true in Ukraine. It's true in the Gaza Strip. And so the kind of things that we Americans like to see are, for example, the operations against Hezbollah that took about 3 weeks to 5 weeks, or the operation against Iran, which took about 12 days, right? Those are operations that any ally of the United States can sustain. Long operations like the one that Israel has been performing in the Gaza Strip are inherently very, very difficult from PR level. And I'm not sure, to be frank, that there is a way for Israel to, quote unquote, win the PR war in the middle of a very long war against an intransigent terrorist enemy that legitimately embeds itself in the most damaging places.
A claim I receive often, and we're starting our campus tour tomorrow, is that Israel is committing genocide. How do you respond to that, Ben?
There's literally no definition of genocide by which Israel is committing a genocide. Typically, a genocide involves the targeted killing of the vast majority of the population, or at least an attempt to do so. There has never been a genocide attempted in world history in which the food that was being shipped in was more than the daily caloric intake of the average American into the areas where you're supposedly attempting to genocide the population. The total population loss in the Gaza Strip thus far has been 3%. During the Holocaust, just to take a reference, it was 50%. During Rwanda, it was significantly higher than 3%. You don't issue leaflet warnings to people. You don't go house to house in a genocide in an attempt to reduce civilian casualties. I understand that people use genocide at this point to just mean thing I don't like. And I get that. I understand. Nobody likes war. Nobody wants war. Certainly not the Israelis who are not at war on October 6th. The fact is that every Israeli family has to send their 18-year-old son or daughter off to the military with the possibility that they're going to get blown up in Gaza. That is not something that any Israeli wants, right, left, or center. The real question is whether the accusations are accurate. They certainly are not, again, by any stretch of the imagination.
Author Ben Shapiro, author of Lions and Scavengers. We're going to get to that in a second. I have one or two other questions on Israel. I think it's very important for our audience to hear this, though, because there is an incessant campaign. And one thing a friend sent to me, interestingly, which is, okay, Charlie, we've pushed back against the media on COVID, on lockdowns, on Ukraine, on the border, so like maybe we should also ask a question. Is the media totally presenting the truth when it comes to Israel? Just a question, that maybe we shouldn't believe everything the media says, because I know I've been conditioned to ask a lot more critical questions over the last couple of years.
So the basic idea in Lions and Scavengers is that inside every human heart, and this goes back to the book of Genesis, that there really is the dutiful part of you that wants to engage in what God made for you, this incredible rationalistic world in which you can mostly understand what's going on, and you have a duty to do the moral thing. You get up every morning, you try to build something, you try to be innovative and risk-taking, you try to defend your civilization, you try to build the social fabric. And then there is the part of us that's driven by envy. And that part of us just looks at our problems and immediately attributes it to some shadowy force outside of our control and tries to rip down the very systems that actually provide prosperity, tries to rip down the lions out of pure envy. Here, think Zoran Mamdani. And that exists in all of us, but it exists civilizationally as well. And when you look at the sort of activities that were taking place on college campus last year, and you see the weird agglomeration of causes that all come together under varying banners. Sometimes it's hating President Trump over immigration. Sometimes it's on Israel. Sometimes it's on LGBT. But it's the same exact people all marching together. And you wonder to yourself, what do these people have in common? And the answer is pretty much nothing, except they really, really don't like our civilization and see the fundamental basis of our civilization as evil and wrong, and believe that it needs to be torn out by the root. This is, to take the most obvious example, Queers for Palestine. Right? Everybody's been puzzling over what the hell is that, right? Queers in Palestine get thrown off buildings. So what is it? The answer is that the radical LGBTQ group doesn't have much in common with the pro-Hamas group, except that both really, really hate the West and believe that the traditional values of our civilization need to be destroyed in order so that they can live more fulfilling lives in some way.
So what you write in here, Lions and Scavengers, saying it's the true story of America, and you seek to defend the principles that shape freedom of a fair and powerful society. We would imagine those emanate from the Bible, obviously. And is Islam compatible with our civilization? Would you put them in the scavenger category?
I certainly think that the Islamic civilizations that we're seeing contemporaneously on the globe, it's very hard to see how that fits in sort of the lion category. It doesn't mean that there aren't individual Muslims who fit in that category, or that there can't be a sort of interpreted version of Islam that couldn't fit into the idea of a God-given world in which you have duties and creative power in line with kind of general very broad principles of biblical morality. But I think the proof is in the pudding. You're not seeing a lot of Islamic countries on planet Earth right now that live by any of the fundamental principles like freedom of mind, private property, equal rule of law applying to all citizens, and traditional virtue.
What would you say is the missing component for those of us in the West to stand up against these forces? What would you say we're doing well and that we need to do more of?
I mean, I think that what we lack, and I think we're starting to see a restoration of it, is the courage to actually stand up on our hind legs and say no. I think that good people tend to be introspective. We tend to think, okay, what did I do wrong? How do I fix that? And we tend to apologize when we do something wrong. Bad people tend to take an apology and then grind your face into the dust over it because they're not engaged in guilt cultures. They're engaged in what are called shame cultures, where the most important thing is not to be made to feel shame, and it is to shame others. And so I think that we, those of us who consider ourselves part of Western civilization, we need to recognize that a constant self-abnegation, a constant attempt to tear ourselves down out of a misguided sense of humility in the face of people who are happy to just destroy our civilization from without and within, that is a gigantic mistake. And it is totally fine to say to people who wish to destroy our civilization, no, your values suck and they don't belong here.
Where does all this resentment come from?
It comes from a wide variety of places, but it tends to come in general from a feeling of frustration and enervation. And so I think that you can get that from people who believe they have been marginalized. You can get that from people who believe they deserve more. You see it a lot actually with university students who seem to believe that they deserve a $250,000 salary for a gender studies degree because they've been taught that they ought to be getting more and then they don't get it. And then they're angry at their parents for not having put them in a position to do that. And so they rebel against everything that they've been taught and everything they haven't been taught. I also think it comes from a bored population. Very often you have people who grew up without any sense of external threat, and they think that pretty much everything that's good in life is the baseline, that's just normal, and that you can tear away everything without the baseline falling away. That, of course, is just false. So some of it comes from ignorance. Some of it comes from envy. The reality is that gratitude as a characteristic of human beings has to be cultivated. It's something you have to teach your kids, gratitude. Envy is totally natural. Right? Envy is easy to do. You see it with small children, right? I have 4, and it's very easy to see kids envy each other and get on each other's case. Being grateful for what they have is a very difficult thing. You have to teach your kids to say thank you. You don't have to teach your kids to say no.
The book is Lions and Scavengers. Boy, that feels like the whole story of Zohran Mamdani, the resentful, envy-driven, bitter Islamist who wants to be mayor of New York City. Ben, thank you for your time, and thanks for going through all the questions on the very important topics today. Lions and Scavengers is the book. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thanks, Charlie.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.